I think we should just start. And some more people will be coming, we hope. We have a pretty great panel here, I think, on the issue of transparency of support and support for transparency. There's, of course, the new article in the Paris Agreement that focuses on transparency entirely. And then transparency is also spread throughout the decision document and the agreement. However, it's a continuing problem, really, of the delivery of climate finance, knowing that the money was actually delivered, knowing that the money was well used, and trying to learn from the delivery of that funding, and to make the best of it, and to improve the practice of climate action, whether it's adaptation, mitigation, or other areas. So my name is Timmons Roberts. I'm at Brown University. We started something called the Climate and Development Lab there about 7 years ago. I bring students from the university, and I work with some postdoctoral fellows like Romain Weikmans, who's up here, who will be presenting. We work with organizations around the world, especially through different channels, but especially through the Adaptation Watch consortium, which we created about, Ian, how long ago? Maybe 5 years ago now? So you can see, if you've got a copy of this, who our partners are. There are partners in Netherlands, Senegal, Mexico, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bolivia, UK, Kenya, Sweden, Germany. So I think we're on about 5 continents. And the idea of this partnership is to identify research gaps and to harness some of this capacity in different places, in different of these research centers and NGOs. So that's sort of the research side. We also are doing some really exciting work trying to actually build systems of transparency. So we have some proposals that we've floated for the CBIT initiative, this capacity building initiative on transparency. For example, to actually pilot a system that would really be a great leap forward, or a step change in transparency mechanisms, showing where the money goes and what it's being used for. So here's how our panels, so that's something about our partnership. There's some more in here. This is a slimmed down version of the larger report. We have a few copies of the full report here. Romain Weikmans will be presenting some of the biggest findings from this. I think the biggest news really in it is where we go through the biennial reports of the donor countries and see how much they actually reported on how much they met the criteria from the UNFCCC for their level of, for transparency. Did they follow the guidelines? Is it transparent enough that a user can really figure out what's going on in their aggregate numbers that they report, and so on? And then do they also provide information at the project level, which we think is really critical for understanding the true nature of climate finance. So here's how it's going to go today. We have 3 country representatives from chapters of Transparency International, which is one of our Adaptation Watch partners and who we've been working with for years. I guess I should call out Lisa Elgis in the middle of the room here, who's been a great Adaptation Watch partner for years, and then Leah Good, who's at the end of the table. And so we're going to hear from Miriam Shuina from the Maldives chapter. We have Cecilia Takuzi Ablitas from PROETICA, which is the TI chapter in Peru. And then we have Zakir Hussain Khan from the Bangladesh chapter. So that's our first section. And then we're going to have a little break, and then we'll hear, we'll hope to open this up for questions right after their presentations. And then we'll have a second round of stuff, which is from sort of on these 2 other projects, which are Ian Tellam about a new project on the governance of adaptation finance, standards for measuring the transparency and the governance of adaptation finance. And then we're going to hear from Romain Weikmans about the report. And then we have a couple of country delegates who will be coming in at the very end, and I'll introduce them later. We also have an indigenous group from Peru, we have, who will speak at the very end or somewhere in there. So we have a lot of people, and we're going to try to do this as kind of a questions and answers to keep it interesting, so you all can stay awake on your Saturday morning and the early afternoon. If you have urgent clarification questions, if you want to raise your hand, we could try to take those. But I think it'd be good to get started first. We're going to first have a quick video presentation from Mariam from the transparency efforts there. And this is something about the problem. We need really to understand what's the problem that we're trying to address. And that's about the cone. It is working?
I can wait.
Let it rip. Okay.
algondu umuruga mirata warabodati muslim badalten asade egiterega ulangu farataki ei algondu doni far bande arugala untan arugege bodumi aruge die ekko mudagira mitan kuriga hamma bodu jangaye goduro itane algondu kudair handan hori iru hamma mitan bodu jangaye gotuga hamma gos muda e aanuge bera gasta kurifaba anna raalo e gastaga ketla onna daad fahum mitamrus mi ha mi beer mi ba hame ham kosmi kalu edigan onna ta gastan o mi aanuge sabum rak giranu le goti ekko evre mihar bar bodo egen ekdum giram go sanika devana aana bismiyati gira gossa mihar gattara mitanan aaru mitanuga inana vara bodo ko husbi do hama e bing hama giravun as mihar ge bito bodiyo jifamiyan hama datta hama bala hama hutta hama edani hama girai hama ekkon edani midawaran danya mege bihi har fahaddaira hama innana gangana ka fansa ka ge hisabun dan hama mi hama midibon ekanyanu ta giravun dani kido ekkolom sebode ta hama giravun ade mege hama vettune ma mihir ge svettene hama edan gota dane ta gangana ka fansa ka fasto ka ge dane hama den hon mina balaruga hama gahegge hiya nudibe komme wotaki waran hono kekkuran hama undugu waguttake de hono gadongu sobon asku dinna emme boda asar kurakam awna gabu kurene asako mihara balaruga mihara average ko hama komme duha ko de tin kudin abadus bandat do bodatta do mi shakwa ko foge da kan pa kore boda pa kurene hama dehydration ehem balaruga musumi gotum mianna badultan asmi annane ki hama kani matiga hori gaskahan kanyan aron men insan na sarabada mi asar tak kuram de de mara bires kane do hamare egana samege kudim samane danti hasponan hamammai iboive rala de ka tsunami indwa mege horya kudina e manzaro te fenonima den adi boda datta is biragan na fish.
So my first question would be, to start off, Miriam, what's the situation with respect to climate, and what are you doing about it in your chapter of Transparency International, and then what's next, and what do you need in terms of external support?
Before I go into your question, let me just say a few words about the video and what I wanted to highlight. This is the story of the people of Lamo Mamendu, which has a population of 800 people, which we just recently visited. And although this is the story of just one island, there are many island communities in the Maldives which echo similar sentiments in how climate change is having an impact on their daily lives. And in addition to the physical changes that you see in the video, many of these island communities also suffer economically. Fishing has gone down due to unpredictable weather patterns, for instance. And in some islands, increased water sanitation has also led to water shortages. And as you can see from the video in Lamo Mamendu, there are families in the Maldives that live in constant fear that in the very near future, the ocean will swallow their homes due to tidal surges. And as many of you know, the Maldives is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, and it receives a lot of funding to address climate change. In fact, between 2011 and 2017, the Maldives received over $168 million in grants and loans to address climate change. And one of the key concerns that most of the beneficiaries that we interact is that they do not have a say in how climate funds are prioritized. Cases like Mamendo show that donors are often detached from the ground reality of the people. And I say this sometimes because aid agencies, as well as even implementing partners, are not always transparent in how they prioritize climate adaptation finance. And often the criteria is often decided without recipient participation. And multilateral implementing entities sometimes design projects with limited contextual knowledge of local needs. And as a result, most frequently raised concern with us is that such projects do not address the urgent, immediate, and real life needs of the people. For example, in the island that you just saw in the video, the islanders had received low carbon LED lamp post, while families in the island continue to live in knee-deep floods every month. Now, how do you think communities would feel knowing that thousands of dollars are spent on trainings and workshops with consultants being hosted in luxury resorts nearby, while they battle with monthly flooding of their homes? And I understand, obviously, capacity building of communities is all well and good, but I also think we need to question how much funds should be allocated for trainings and workshops, while immediate adaptation needs of people are not prioritized. And I think this mismatch between community needs and projects is not only attributed to multilateral or international agencies, but also government institutions in countries like the Maldives, where still there is very limited space for citizens to actually actively participate in addressing climate change. And I think this is why there needs to be some set or established adaptation finance standards, so that the beneficiaries actually get to have a say in how climate projects are implemented in their countries, and the vulnerable priorities should be really the donors' priorities and not the other way around. But and also I wanted to stress on the importance of donors being more stringent in demanding transparency in how their money is spent, also to play a more active role in holding implementing partners more accountable, and also making sure that from conception to implementation to design, that the beneficiaries remain the focus and that they are part of the process. And in reference to Timmons, your question, at the moment, we've done quite a lot of, we've done an assessment on climate finance system in the Maldives, and some of the key issues that we've repeatedly highlighted is the lack of transparency on decision-making, lack of transparency in how much funds that the country receives, how decisions made on this, and also the issue of lack of consultation with the communities that are actually suffering from climate change. So that, even though there are many examples we could give from the Maldives where similar sort of mismatch between community needs and donor priorities are demonstrated. So that's just in a nutshell the sort of climate finance issues the country is facing.
I think that's fantastic. It really helps us, I think, frame the discussion from here forward. So I think you've approached all of our questions. The last one, though,
Yeah.
what about external support? What could be used? What would be helpful?
Like I said before, I think donors need to play a more active role in making sure that implementing partners on the ground are also adhering to these standards of good governance in the country.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right.
We'll
Thank you.
come back to you and we'll have
Yeah.
time for questions in a minute. So Cecilia Takuzi will be speaking a little the perspective of Peru. She's going to talk about RED and RED Plus, and the focus there. A question: how do you do transparency with RED funding, especially on issues like land tenure and other issues? What are the key issues for transparency of climate finance with RED, and what else are the key issues for your organization? Make sure it's on.
So Cecilia will speak in Spanish, and I will do a non-professional translation immediately afterwards.
Ok, bueno, primero, muchas gracias por la invitación. Es un honor estar en esta mesa y poder contar lo que sucede, el tema de red en Perú y cómo se está avanzando también con los diferentes fondos que tenemos.
So first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. It's an honor to be here and to talk about the different Red Plus mechanisms in Peru and how the different funds are working.
No, antes de contestar las preguntas de Tim, yo quiero comentarles un poco cómo está la situación. La presentación, me imagino que luego se las van a pasar. Igual tenemos USBs en la parte de atrás con todos los informes, con todas las investigaciones que tenemos, en especial lo que es salvaguardas, el plan anticorrupción y gobernanza.
So as I don't have too much time, I'm going to skip quickly through the presentation, but we have USB sticks which have all of the reports that we've conducted at PROETICA, one which is on Red Plus safeguards, one which is on anti-corruption and forestry, and one which is on governance and forestry.
Okay. ¿Por qué es importante hablar del tema de salvaguardas y vincularlo al tema de fondos climáticos y al tema de transparencia? Primero, porque Perú entre 2012 y 2015 obtuvo más de $500 millones para el tema red y el tema forestal.
Okay. So why is it important to speak about Red Plus safeguards and governance in the context of Red? My first point is that between 2012 and 2015, Peru received more than $500 million for the development of Red Plus.
Estos fondos son FCPF, FIP, también ONU-RED, también tenemos declaración conjunta con Noruega y Alemania. Son diferentes fondos que a la final lo que van a buscar es implementar proyectos, pero también un tema muy importante que es el tema salvaguardas. Parte de los hallazgos que hemos encontrado en los estudios es que se canalizó mucho de los fondos y se dieron altas expectativas también con beneficiarios.
The Peru is receiving funds from FCPF, from the FIP, from bilateral aid from Norway and from Germany. Much of this money is going into implementing projects, but also safeguards is a big part of the finance that's allocated. And one of our main findings is that a lot of expectation has been created with the channeling of these funds.
Pero bueno, uno de los problemas es que cuando el punto focal de red es un solo ministerio y no trabaja o no incluye a otros actores, tenemos problemas como que obtienes mucho dinero, pero cuando llega el dinero, la implementación de estos es muy lento. ¿Por qué? Contexto político y procesos burocráticos de la gestión pública.
So although there has been significant funding that's been channeled into the country, one of the challenges that we face is having these very high expectations for implementation that have been thwarted in implementation in reality, because having the one focal point is the Ministry of Environment to develop these plans, there has not been sufficient coordination with other ministries, with especially the Ministry of Finance, and this political context and the administration, the context of the complex public administration that's required for the implementation of RED means that implementation has been much slower than expectations.
En especial todo lo que tiene que ver con las expectativas que tiene sociedad civil y también pueblos indígenas. Muchos de los fondos va para ver temas de gobernanza indígena, saneamiento territorial. Entonces, al analizar esos documentos y ver los procesos, nos dimos cuenta de este hallazgo y también de que todos los documentos tienen presupuesto para consulta, información, participación, pero muchos de estos presupuestos se quedan en consultorías y no se implementan. Entonces, no estamos teniendo actividades para informar, para involucrar, para transparentar información y sí para pagar consultorías.
Okay. So significant expectations have been created for civil society and for indigenous peoples that RED Plus would improve participation, would improve consultation and dissemination of information. And each one of these funds, so each one of these original proposals for the funds for whether bilateral aid or FCPF or UN RED, they include budgets for participation, for consultations, and for dissemination of information, as well as for a grievance mechanism in the country. But the reality is that there has been very limited implementation of that we have seen so far in the country. Much money has gone into consultancies, and we haven't seen the real benefits of improved governance.
Okay. Y bueno, creo que eso un poco va a resumir. La necesidad de poder hablar de salvaguardas, transparencia, información, es que en nuestra realidad tenemos esto: poca fiscalización, superposición de derechos, políticas incoherentes en el tema de cómo vemos los bosques y la conservación de los bosques. No hay tampoco procedimientos internos en los cuales se pueda saber a quién me voy a quejar, con quién voy a consultar. Hay ausencia de espacios sostenibles de participación. Es muy diferente una reunión de 1 hora que tener espacios de participación en el tiempo para estos fondos. Y hasta el día de hoy no hay un sistema de salvaguardas en el país que nos ayude realmente a incrementar transparencia.
Okay, so this is a short overview of the main findings. That we feel that these policies are not taking into account the reality of the country, the political reality of the country, the very limited amount of oversight and control of public bodies involved in the forestry sector. There isn't information about how to register a complaint in the case of corruption or wrongdoing or human rights issues. And there's a huge issue in terms of overlapping in terms of land tenure and overlapping rights towards land. The main challenges we face is that there is a lack of a sustainable forum for participation in the country for civil society. There's a big difference between hosting a meeting once in a while to try and get stakeholder input and actually having sustainable capacity building for civil society and Indigenous people to contribute to the development of RED. And so fundamentally, as we see it at the moment, there isn't a system of safeguards in the country. Good.
Thank you. I think that's been a sort of a theme we've been hearing a lot, that consultancies and sort of one-off spending is not having enduring impacts on the ground, and that capacity is not monitoring these kind of projects. And so I think that's very useful. What about international support? Just one question, could Cecilia, could you say something about what would be the most useful thing for a group like Adaptation Watch or the people in this room to do to help address the issue you just spoke about?
¿Qué sería el más útil desde el internacional? ¿Qué se requiere Perú de la comunidad internacional?
Okay. Todo lo que yo comento es en base a los estudios, no es un punto personal. Es necesario que la cooperación internacional que llega a los países, en especial en vías de desarrollo, que tenemos muchos recursos naturales, pueda tener una coordinación. Si bien a los países se nos ofrece el apoyo, es muy difícil que países en vías de desarrollo digan no a un fondo. Es necesario que hayan coordinaciones también desde la parte internacional para saber cómo también se implementan proyectos a nivel nacional. Sí, de los financistas, para poder implementar los proyectos. Y también es necesario saber los contextos nacionales para la implementación de los proyectos.
Okay, so Cecilia says that in her opinion, we need much greater coordination between international actors in Peru, and
Y que también puedan saber, se trabaja.
And also a far greater understanding of the political context in the country and how public administration works to be able to develop plans that are realistic and can be implemented.
Perfect. Thank you. That's for sure. So next we're going to hear from Zakir Hossain Khan, who will speak about transparency in the Paris Agreement and its implications for Bangladesh. Zakir. let me ask you your questions too, just to get you started, or as a way to set this up. What's the situation with respect next? What do you need?
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This is Jackie from TI Bangladesh. I'd like to just give some overview of what's really, in terms of the national context, what is in the progress so far on the transparency in terms of climate finance, especially in the adaptation finance. If we'd just like to focus on just some overview on the finance part, especially on the recipient part, what really experienced by TI Bangladesh government as well. There is an obligation in the Paris Agreement that you have said already. It has been written in that the parties shall were engaging on voluntary basis promote sustainable development and ensure environmental integrity and transparency, including governance, especially in participation of the community and the stakeholder decision making, and shall apply robust accounting to ensure inter alia the avoidance of the double counting. And there was a background actually, and from that background of the Paris Agreement, already we have started jointly with Adaptation Watch, Brown University, and the TI Secretariat for just adaptation finance governance assessment. That would be really focused on the real scenario in the coming days. Hopefully by next year, we will come out the concrete report on that. And so far, the progress have been we have seen that in terms of the roadmap to the US $100 billion, it has been declared by the 31 countries. And especially in terms of the transparency in adaptation finance, we need to be clear, especially on the recipient part. Bangladesh and other developing countries requires to know more about how the 50-50 balance in adaptation and mitigation will be ensured, and the means of the scaling of the adaptation finance in the absence of the time-bound commitment, where the finance would be new and additional, grant or loan, that should be clear, and also whether the $100 billion would be the beyond the promise for the loss and damage, whether it would be the go beyond that. In terms of the particular case for Bangladesh, it is severely running short of the adaptation finance, mostly for 5 reasons. Firstly, we have seen that developing countries are not providing that required fund what is really need for the adaptation purpose. Secondly, so far they have already committed in around $36 billion. They have mobilized only 42% of their total commitment. And also due to the tough GCF standards, Bangladesh couldn't go for the direct access yet. Even though Bangladesh have been approved the one project in the last 2015, 6 November, it has been 1 year past. Bangladesh couldn't get any money yet. We don't know what is the real reason behind that, but there is a little worry for the Bangladesh. What is, because it is $40 million projects. And also the last and very important thing is that the reducing fund flow from the both national budget as well as the developed countries as well. So that is real uncertainty of the adaptation finance for Bangladesh, because it needs $2.5 billion per year, but so far in the last 6 years, it could mobilize only around $1.27 billion. So that has been pushing Bangladesh go for the loan, and that recently World Bank has already offered $2 billion as a loan, which is not really expected, and we don't think that what is the conditionalities behind that, but that should be disclosed first. And we still believe that Bangladesh should Bangladesh is entitled to get the compensation rather than the loan. On particularly, this is the finance part, but other things from Bangladesh perspective, which is really important to comply the governance in the utilization of the fund. And if you see, there are the particular clause have been included in the Paris Agreement that adaptation action should follow a country-driven, gender responsive, and fully transparent approach, considering the vulnerability groups and also the other ecosystem conservations. If we see, TI Bangladesh could have already carried out the survey in 2005 among the 500 affected communities in 10 different adaptation project size. We have already identified that around 45% of the people surveyed are able to specify the name of the project implementing entity. Rest of them people don't know who are actually implementing the which projects at what purpose. Around 68% of them are not able to aware of the approved project. I mean, they don't know how much money have been allocated and for what purpose and what are the project activities. They don't know actually. And which is very important regarding the participation of the vulnerable community in decision makings. And these findings is not so appreciable because around 61% of the people claim that the implementing entity didn't consult with them at the project design phase. And also there is no formal grievance redress mechanism in any implementing entities. And whenever the project location is really very far away from the offices of the project implementing entity, so they are not possible to lodge the complaints by spending their own money. And also in terms of the stakeholder consultation, there is a little consultation, little scope for the stakeholder to be consulted. Even the INDC formulation stage, the stakeholders are not consulted at all. So the money which has been claimed, this is not fully, the ensured whether this is rightly, properly counted or estimated. And in terms of the conservation of the ecosystems, one of the reason for not being able to direct access is the absence of the robust environmental and social safeguard, and as well as environmental and social management framework. And this has been really very much worry for the civil society, not only for Bangladesh, but across the globe. That is that the UNESCO World Heritage Site, that is the Sundarban, the mangrove forest at the coastal side, the government has planned to build a coal plant. That would not only be counterproductive for the adaptation, but also, the around 27 million people in the Bangladesh are really vulnerable to the climate change. And out of 22 million people stay at the coastal side. Any sort of natural disaster comes due to the climate change induced phenomena, those people will be more vulnerable, and the cost of adaptation will be higher for them. So this is the things I believe that the government of Bangladesh and as well as the global community should come forward, especially to ensure the transparency, accountability, and participation of the climate finance, especially the adaptation finance. And those are the way forwards we have just included, just to consider some of the issues that undertake the vulnerability risk assessment. The finance part, there should be polluters principle, and also develop a robust environmental and social safeguard mechanism. And those are the issues I believe, and especially the local community voice for about their needs and their complaints. And we believe that citizen actions are the key to transparency, accountability, and participation in adaptation finance. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Stay up there for 1 second. Thank you. That was really pretty remarkable tying of the global negotiations and this issue very broadly with national and local examples. So about what TIA to address that.
Okay, so just gonna just open the presentations. The last slide.
Yeah, you rushed through that last slide, but I appreciated it.
The thing is that TI Bangladesh has already been started its intervention in climate finance since 2011. Firstly, assess the whole climate finance regime, especially in terms of who are the actors and what are the real governance in terms of transparency, accountability, and the participation in the decision making, as well in the project design, as well as what are the roles of the community in project preparation, as well as the project implementation monitoring. So gradually we are tracking the whole finance from recipients to the utilization part. And secondly, we have developed the project tracking methods that has been applied for tracking in the grounds, so that we can know what's really happening in the ground rather than to just focus on mostly macro perspective. So this is all till to date around 28 projects so far we have already tracked at the grounds. And the third thing is that we actually engage with the community, and we have already arranged several public hearings on the project tracking, our reports. And there is a face-to-face, you know, the authority and also community face-to-face to interact. There is a scope to know and to lodge complaints and to responses. And these are the broadly we engage, and we have 45 community of concerned citizens across the countries. And out of them, 30 committees are really working for the climate-specific interventions on the grounds.
That's fantastic. I think it's, you know, anybody who knows me knows that this is exactly the kind of thing that I talk about all the time, that we could have tracking systems under the UNFCCC that would allow this work to happen. So you wouldn't have to build it yourself, but you could be engaged in, you know, bringing communities into the process of providing this sort of crowdsourced information about each project. It's possible, it's being done in some other sectors, and we could do it, you know, very well in climate finance. So thank you
very much.
So now we have in our program to, you know, spend 3 minutes or so on the audience to break this up a little bit. We're done with part 1, right? There's part 2 coming up here. Does anybody? We don't have to stop. Don Brown from Penn State University, or yeah, Penn State, right? Oh, sorry. Okay. You need a mic because there are people actually who will watch this or listen to this from home on their computers. Where's the roving mic? We had 2 of them here. Oh, it's the throwing cube. I didn't know we had the throwing cube this year. I've not seen that yet.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Don Brown. I'm a professor at Widener University Law School. I'm working on transparency and mitigation issues. And I'm curious as to how you see the negotiations going to improve the transparency, and where in the negotiations does transparency for adaptation fit? Does it fit in the broader negotiations about transparency? What's your view? What's happening? Where should it go?
So I actually would probably punt that question to the second half, because there will be some things about that, especially in Romain's presentation. But there is, for example, negotiations going on under the substitute track on Article 9.7, which is about the modalities of climate finance. That means what counts as climate finance, how are we going to report that, and how are we going to account for it? And it's, I think, early days still. I mean, the draft text includes, that's just going from substa up to the COP. It sort of lists some principles for what should be included in that, in doing that well. So I can mention a little bit more about that. Yes, Stephen, can we pass the mic? Robert.
Gracias. Buenos días. Soy Robert Guimaraes de la Amazonía de Perú y quisiera hacer un breve comentario y una pregunta. En la exposición de PROETICA escuché que había como muchos fondos que están implementando diferentes mecanismos y sobre todo me interesa lo del gobierno de Noruega y Alemania. Nosotros sentimos desde las comunidades indígenas de la Amazonía que no hay un proceso de información de los mecanismos de cómo tienen que acceder las comunidades indígenas para estos recursos. 1. Yo vengo de una comunidad afectada por la expansión de monocultivos y se han arrasado como muchos bosques. Entonces hay una contradicción entre los compromisos internacionales y la cuestión local.
Sí, espera un momentito por Lía hacer una traducción.
Ok, gracias.
Lía.
Okay, so this is Roberto Guimaraes, an indigenous leader from Peru, and he has a comment and a question. So he saw from the presentations that there are many different funds implementing REDD+ in Peru. Particularly, he was interested in the funds coming from Norway and Germany, and expresses his concern that there is a lack of information on how indigenous communities can access those funds, and has a concern about the disconnect between between the disconnect between the international agreements and what is actually happening on the ground.
Sí, y para conocer más mi caso, pueden entrar a YouTube. Hay un video que dice ¿A dónde voy a vivir? Santa Clara de Uchuña. Y ese es un claro ejemplo de cómo las comunidades no tienen acceso a estos recursos, y es una comunidad que está reclamando el reconocimiento jurídico legal de su territorio de 38,000 hectáreas. Gracias. ¿Y cómo podemos ayudar? Estoy aquí en busca de solidaridad. Gracias.
¿Cómo la comunidad no tiene acceso a la tierra y recursos? Okay. So you can, I would like to give my own case. There's a YouTube video which you can access if you're interested, which is called ¿A dónde voy a vivir? Where am I going to live? And Robert's case gives an example of how communities are losing access to their lands, losing access to resources, and he's seeking solidarity and wants to understand better why this disconnect is happening.
Very helpful, and I agree there is this disconnect between the negotiations and what's happening on the ground. That's kind of the gap we're trying to bridge here, but I suppose there will always be some distance. One last thing. Cecilia.
Sí, bueno, yo quiero hacer un comentario sobre lo que nos ha informado Robert, y es cierto, Perú tenemos diferentes fondos. Este gran fondo con Noruega por 300 millones tiene un ítem que tiene que ver con la titulación para pueblos indígenas, pero sí, lo que sí se puede ver es el doble discurso entre los diferentes fondos que tenemos y también la realidad que ocurre con la incoherencia de nuestras políticas y procesos internos.
So Cecilia just wanted to agree with the colleague from Peru that although there is a lot of money flowing to Peru for REDD+, over 300 million just from Norway, and although these projects have land tenure rights and the rights of indigenous people in the proposals, she's seeing a double discourse between what is in those documents and actually what's happening on the ground and the impacts on indigenous people in Peru.
Bueno, y eso repercute en nuestros compromisos internacionales. Nosotros hemos dicho que vamos a hacer una reducción del 30% de emisiones, queremos hacer buenas cosas, pero a nivel de la Amazonía falta la fiscalización, ¿no? Hay también procesos corruptos en el tema del cambio de uso de la tierra.
And the disconnect between Peru's negotiating, the Peruvian government's negotiations, where it's claiming to be pushing for a 30% reduction in emissions, but the reality in Peru and especially in the Amazon, that there is a lack of control, there's a lack of oversight. There's in the forestry sector, there's a lot of corruption and issues with land tenure.
That's extremely useful. And that problem is identified around the world, really, in different parts of climate finance. So now we begin part 2, in which we're going to have these 2 presentations and a couple of quick questions let me start with Ian Tellam from Adaptify, which is a consulting group in the Netherlands. Ian is actually sort of the hub around which the spokes of Adaptation Watch have turned and been connected. And Ian, here's my question for you. Can you tell us about the climate finance governance standards? This kind of, it's a brand new idea, I think, of setting up standards for climate finance governance. And can you tell us about the sort of the broader strategic goal here? What are we trying to do?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Timmons. So I'll talk about the financial system and governance as it relates to climate change, mitigation, adaptation. So the background to this is the financial system. Finance flows. It flows into stocks, and stocks are managed by institutions, and those institutions taken together make up the financial system. And the financial system itself has flows which are, with respect to climate change, mitigation, and adaptation, are positive or negative. So you can think of some supply and demand of financial flows which are bad for mitigation and bad for adaptation. And you have some flows, climate finance, which have a supply and a demand which are positive for climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. And taken as a whole, steering this system, there are a number of instruments which are available: taxes, carbon taxes, regulations, subsidies, government programs, phasing out of obsolete technologies such as incandescent light bulbs and so on. But this system or this ability to steer, or the act of steering the financial system, is called governance. Comes from the Greek word guberno, which is to mean to steer, maybe steering a boat. And what we see with respect to climate finance as a whole is that the amount of money available is much smaller than is needed to fix the problem, and it will always be that way. And in fact, the way that climate finance is conceived is really to be an incentive to the private sector to move towards, to transition towards an inclusive green growth, or to a green economy. And however, for this to happen, the standard of governance as a whole has to be very good. And what we see is that, generally speaking, the standard of governance is not coherent, and it's not fit for purpose. So we, within Adaptation Watch, are working together to develop a new approach to try to deal with this problem, to raise the standard of governance for climate adaptation finance. And the approach that we've taken is we want to base it within the UN system. So we took a framework which is already developed by UNDP. UNDP has a climate finance framework, and they divide climate finance into 4 components. They're financial planning, access of the funds, delivery, which means implementation, and then the final one is MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification. And in respect of each of these 4 components, we've gone through the governance indicators literature, and we chose, together with stakeholders in Bangladesh and the Maldives, we chose 5 key indicators which are specifically relevant to climate adaptation finance, and they are transparency, accountability, participation, integrity, which is the opposite of corruption, and coherence. That means coherence with existing policies and plans which are relevant to climate adaptation, climate mitigation. And we've also divided these lists, this list of indicators which then come out, 4 times 5, if you have 4 components of climate finance, and then these 5 criteria, then you have a list of 20 indicators. And the indicators have been designed for Maldives and for the Bangladesh context specifically, and then split into 4 stakeholder groups. One is for international donors, which are based in the country, and then you have business, government, and civil society. And we've designed an approach where these sets of indicators are used in a perception-based online survey with stakeholders, which then results in a baseline survey of the current state of governance in Bangladesh and Maldives respectively, which is then used to inform a national workshop with stakeholders who were the respondents in the online survey, with the objective to reach a commonly agreed national governance standard for climate adaptation finance. At the moment, it's a work in progress, and we're very interested to reach out to people who might be interested to join us, to offer support as partners, and so on.
Thank you, Ian. So this tool is, it's going to be piloted very soon, right? And so we hope to reiterate on this and get it better to understand sort of how well countries are doing in those stages of planning, prioritization, access, and delivery. Give me a sentence or 2 about the broader strategic goal. I mean, what are you trying to, what's the big idea?
Yeah, the bigger picture is that climate finance is, as I said, it's too small to solve the problem, and it always will be, which means that it needs to be used very strategically. But in order for it to be used strategically, all the different actors who are involved in governing the financial system need to work in a more harmonious way. There needs to be an effective interplay between government and the private sector and NGOs in order for this to happen. And what we're trying to do with this governance standards approach is it affects or it facilitates a multi-stakeholder dialogue around these issues.
Yeah. Thanks. So thanks, Ian. We'll have time for some questions on this, hopefully, and some more discussion. I think really the first presentation from Mariam, talked about the need for these kind of standards, and they're going to be trying this out in Maldives and in Bangladesh. Should be very interesting. So, and we want to shout out to Kevin Adams, who did a lot of work on the standards, and he's in the back of the room. Thank you, Kevin. I also want to shout out to some people as we move on to the transparency towards Adaptation Watch. This is our second annual one. These are both on our website, which is at adaptationwatch.org. So you can go back and had an assessment in there on the Rio marker system for tracking advance, where we went through 5,000 projects by different aid agencies. In this report, it was led especially by Romain Weikmans, who's now moved from my lab back to the Free University in Brussels, and Danielle Falzon. I don't know if Danielle is here. She put in a ton of work on this. We have a couple of students who did work on the Chapter 4 analysis, where the research team went through each of the donor reports. A couple of people are in the room. Harry helped with that, especially last year and this year. I'm sorry, Kevin Adams, Harry, August. Let's see who else is here. Stephen Stars back there was handing out the reports. So thank you guys, way to go. So Homa, would you like to tell us, what's the report? Why is it important? What do we do next?
Yes, thank you very much, Timmons, and thank you also to all the students and researchers who took part in this report. So let me try to make 3 points during the next 5 minutes. The first one that I want to make is that I believe, and we believe, that the current inadequate climate finance accounting and reporting system that we currently have represents a collective failure. The UNFCCC guidelines leave extreme discretion to developed countries regarding climate finance accounting. Each developed country can decide what it counts as climate finance, including why its climate finance can be considered as new and additional. In the absence of any common accounting methodology agreed under the UNFCCC, most developed countries have heavily relied on the data that they collect through the OECD DAC Rio marker methodology to report to the UNFCCC Secretariat. However, this methodology was not originally designed to monitor financial pledges. And the Rio marker methodology has many important limits when it comes to accurately monitor the fulfillment of climate finance pledges. I will just go through 2 of them, but there are many more, or at least some more. The first one, probably one of the most important one, is the lack of granularity of the Rio marker methodology, which means that when an aid project is marked as principally or significantly targeting mitigation or adaptation, the whole cost of the project is considered to be mitigation or adaptation related, even if only a component of the project may only target adaptation or mitigation. Another important limit of this methodology that has been highlighted by several studies, and including by ours, is the highly questionable quality of the Rio markers data. And we may probably link that to the fact that it's only based on self-reporting by developed countries. There is no independent reassessment of the marking. So some of these limits have been partly recognized by a number of developed countries, which have consequently modified the Rio marker methodology for their own financial reporting to the convention. The result of this, unfortunately, is a variety of poorly harmonized and accounting and reporting practices of climate finance. However, we are presented with a huge opportunity now, probably a lifetime opportunity with the that happened in Paris last year, to task the substat to develop accounting modalities for finance provided and mobilized through public interventions. So these discussions are happening now and are supposed to lead to a recommendation in November 2018 to be considered and adopted hopefully by the CMA. So in the report, and I won't go into much details here, in the report we discuss some of the key modalities that we believe should be agreed by negotiators in order to build a really robust accounting system. Maybe I can just highlight two of them, is that we believe that financial flows should be consistently reported in grant equivalent and not at face value, as it's currently the case for many developed countries. Also, a very important point that we like to highlight is that information should be provided at the project level by all contributors. That's the only way we can make sure that the system is really transparent. So the second point that I want to make is that the current inadequate system that we have today is not only collective failure, it also represents individual failures. While developed countries are required to submit documentation describing in a rigorous, robust, and transparent manner the underlying assumptions and methodologies used to produce information on finance, only a few of them are very transparent in this regard. So in our report, in our assessment, we found that developed countries' parties' average level of compliance toward those and other UNFCCC climate finance transparency requirements declined from a poor average of 58% for their first biennial report, which they submitted in 2014, to an even worse mean of 52% in their second biennial report, which were submitted just after the Paris conference. So as you can see in this figure, I don't know if you can see very well, but you can check the report at adaptationwatch.org. The level of compliance toward UNFCCC climate finance transparency provisions greatly varies from one contributing country to another. And an important finding is that while donor countries claim they are working toward a more transparent climate finance process, we see instead, unfortunately, that they continue to struggle to meet even basic UNFCCC guidelines. The third point that I want to raise here is that, and it's so as you had understood it, those are quite different points that I'm making here, representing different chapters of our report. So the third point here is that we should pay particular attention to some of the gaps left by the Paris Agreement and Paris Decision text in building a comprehensive and coherent transparency system. I will just highlight some of them. For example, on the transparency of support, one important gap is that I told you before about the discussions that are happening now about the accounting modalities for climate finance provided and mobilized by via public interventions, but there are no such modalities that are being discussed for climate finance received. So the thing is that if we don't have modalities about climate finance received, then developing countries won't be able to report on the climate finance that they receive in a coherent manner. So it will be very difficult to compare what the developed countries report and what the developing countries report. There are other examples, but I want to remain short here. Just to highlight another important gap that's related to the support for transparency this time, is that we see a huge risk that the whole transparency framework that is being built primarily focuses on the mitigation side. That was a question that was raised a bit before. We see a huge danger, so I think we have to be very careful that the transparency framework should also be, of course, about climate finance and about adaptation action. So we need to be careful and to be cautious about that. And of course, the whole Paris transparency framework will require huge amounts of money just in terms of capacity building in developing countries, but also in developed countries, because many agencies are still not well equipped enough to be able to track the project that they fund in developing countries. So to conclude, and I want to say, yes, I think it's good to conclude with that. Transparency matters because untransparent reporting that we have currently to the UNFCCC means that it's impossible to compare developed countries' financial effort to adaptation and mitigation in developing countries. It leads, as we all know, to very contrasting statements in the fulfillment of developed countries' financial pledges. It also leads to the erosion of trust between parties in international climate negotiation. It profoundly complicates the tracking of potential gaps in the financial means that are needed for adaptation and mitigation in developing countries, and it damages the ability to conduct rigorous research on project and program success and learning for planning better interventions in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Romain. That was amazing. Really quick run through a lot of information. There's 4 chapters in here that are the substantive ones in the intro and the conclusion. So there's a lot there. My question for you, and then we're going to turn it over to our negotiators. Where would you get the funding for the support for transparency? What do you think? What do you think we should? How much is needed, to really set up this?
We don't know yet, and
system?
that was one of our recommendations. Is that we think that the Secretariat or parties should at least make an assessment of the level of finance that is needed for this transparency framework to be put in place and to work in a robust manner. So we don't know. It will cost a lot of money for sure. Currently, there is this CBIT initiative, which you mentioned before, the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, which will be implemented for, the money is going to the GEF, the Global Environmental Fund. Currently, there are pledges for a bit more than $30 million, I think. Some of that money is coming from the US, I believe, so I don't know if it will eventually be given to the GEF. And I think that for the first, at least for the establishment of this initiative, they wanted 50 million. So they don't have that amount of money so far, but it will cost much more than that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And could you go back to the main slide, the event slide?
This one?
No, the whole the program for the event today with the list of speakers. So we invited a series of delegates, for example, from Peru. Just want to make sure that that person's not here, and the Maldives. And I think they were both drawn into negotiations and were not able to come. We do have from Bangladesh, Dr. Fazli Rabi Sadek Ahmed, who will be able to speak a little. And we are now typing in that Herman, is willing to speak. Great, for Germany, the delegation of Germany. And I do want to point out, at the top of the table, the best performing country is Germany. So we should really give them a little round of applause. I think we should just stop and do that. Ready? Because this is actually a lot of work. And I think the reporters, that are in the basement of Foreign Assistance of State and Foreign Affairs don't get any credit for doing a good job. We only seem to beat up on them for doing a bad job. So anyway, I think at the top of the table was Germany, Ireland, and Sweden. And unfortunately, the numbers were, 68 and 70% respectively. I mean, we're not easy graders or markers. I suppose, there's differences among different professors in a university and how hard they are on their students. But, those are not exactly, anyway, we want to leave room for improvement, I guess we should say. So this is early days still, and we hope that there will be more improvement. And that's really our whole goal with this, is to provide some credit where it's due and to some encouragement, and hopefully to make these systems clearer. And I did want to say that one thing we've been talking a lot, and I'm thrilled that this has come up in the modalities, for example, in session workshop the other day, this thing called IATI, or the International Aid Transparency Initiative, in which countries report their project level information under standard formats, and then that information can be aggregated in different ways for different different needs. So as countries need to report, for example, to the EU, they can use that standardized data and aggregate it in one way. When they report for the UNFCCC, they can aggregate it in a different way without having to type it all in again. And then they can also aggregate it in a different way for the OECD annual creditor reporting system figures and so on. So at the bottom of the list, for those who don't have a full report, are Greece at 15%. We didn't really want to beat up on poor Greece this year, but they dropped a lot from 48%. Austria, Denmark, Luxembourg, and New Zealand all are below 40% scores. So there is a huge amount of room for improvement. And it was really kind of depressing to see a drop in transparency from the 2014 biennial reports to the 2016 biennial reports, because we hear about transparency so much in the Paris Accord. It's really part of the discourse now that transparency should be at all levels. So Dr. Ahmed, would you like to say a few words about the Bangladesh's responses?
Thank you, Timmons moderator, and thanks all the presenters. Actually, it's particularly the last presenter, he highlighted actually the funding support from international level and tracking and the accounting, this and that. Actually, it covers a lot of my speech. But if we go before that, financing under UNFCCC and international level it's really crucial, and I think it's complex accounting modalities, and to understand it, it's not easy matter. But my understanding that from the beginning, if we see that actually climate financing started from this Marrakesh Accord in 2001. In that year, that the first financial mechanism under operations, it's least developed countries fund, special climate change fund, and adaptation fund as well. And at that time, based on the creation of funds, actually the least developed countries prepared National Adaptation Program of Action. And it was decided that all the funds will be provided by the developed countries. That is far from 2001, 2005. But specifically, if we understand what really financing is flowing from the global level, if we see the first start financing, actually this Copenhagen Accord, it said that new and additional funding provided from 2010 to 12, it is 30 billion. And in the financial mechanism under the UNFCCC, that it only allows the grant and concessional loans. And Copenhagen Accord, it said new and additional financing priority should be given to the vulnerable countries, least developed countries, states. And what is happening if we go to the presenters, that if we see that less than 10% fund goes to the adaptation, and 90% we take it. One thing. And if we go through the new and additional criteria of that fund, very few amount of money covers the criteria of new and additional. This is the example of first start financing. And now in Cancun agreement, we see the Green Climate Fund. It is under operational. And for the last 6 years, although we are telling that from 2020, 100 billion will be generated per year, diversified of sources. But what we are saying, the Green Climate Fund, that $10 billion for 4 years, that means $2.5 billion for each year for all developing countries, including least developed countries and climate vulnerable countries.
If it's delivered, yeah.
Right now, it is decision on $1.2 billion already decided, But if we go again, that out of the $1.2 billion, $1 billion goes to the multilateral international agencies. It is going through international agencies, and $0.2 billion goes to the NI, national implementing entities. Although we are always telling about direct access, country ownership, country access, the most vulnerable countries must be easier and prioritized. But in practically, actually, this is not happening. And if we go to the accounting system, I try to understand international financial flow on climate change issues. I got different kind of accounting, as he said. It is so complicated, and to some extent, it is not clear, and to some extent, it is unethical as well, because same fund goes to the different window. It is shown as ODA window, as well as in climate window, as well as in the faster financing. The problem is that there is no climate finance definition right now. And in the GCFW, we see that adaptation financing, mitigation financing, and there is another window recently emerged. It is cross-cutting. And I tried to go through in one project that cross-cutting, why it is cross-cutting, so far I understand, more than 90% activities of the cross-cutting is mitigation. But it is because there is some things that 50-50 balance between adaptation and mitigation. Now, another window emerged, it is cross-cutting. It is the biggest window under GCF. That means more than fund going mostly from the cross-cutting, but we don't know the definition of cross-cutting. That means right now, the national entities funding for adaptation, funding for vulnerable countries is peanut. So, and if we go through how much we need for adaptation activities, although we are saying 2020, 100, but right now there's so many calculations, it is around $50 to $100 billion needed only for adaptation. Mitigation is it's variable. It's 500 billion, 1 trillion, this and that. But mitigate, if we clearly go to the mitigation, adaptation, it is 50 to 100 billion.
Could you say something about transparency?
Transparency. On transparency, I'm saying that accounting rules, what we are going to do in Paris Agreement under the Article 13, you already mentioned the Article 9.7, it said only for the accounting modalities for the public financing. But 100 billion is not coming through public. It is coming from different sources. But right now there is no accounting modalities of private. But we are working thoroughly on that. Article 9.7, that public accounting modalities we are going to. But you know that this is the starting of the APA. We have to work at least another 2 years to finalize that modalities, procedures, and guidelines to finalize that. But in this meeting in Marrakesh, actually we are trying to go through the what kind of elements should be in the modalities procedure. But still is very preliminary stage. The parties are saying their own views on that. This and that. But one very crucial issues. Accounting rules and adaptation financing. Adaptation, as we are from the most vulnerable countries and least developed countries. The adaptation financing, if it is different sources, public, private, equity, loan, these and that. In that case, adaptation is not creating any kind of revenues. So how could we accounting that? How much we getting for adaptation, and how we could get access from the private sources? It's some very crucial issues because the adaptation, the loan is not working well.
Yeah, I want to make sure we save time.
Okay, and just I'm concluding that one thing that we hope under APA, our discussion go through this so that we can get a successful accounting rules so that we can at least track the financial flows from international sources in different areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was actually right on topic, and it shows really what's at stake here in these negotiations. So thank you very much. Now, Hermann Amke from the delegation of Germany, thank you so much for coming. And I wanted to make sure to save a little time. We've been through 8 speakers, so congratulations to you guys for hanging in here.
Is this working? You can also speak loudly.
No, we need here, sit here.
I feel less efficient anyways. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. Thank you for leaving me your space as well, so this doesn't feel so much like an evening speech to me. I think we certainly, as the German government, think that transparency is absolutely key, and from all different perspectives that have been mentioned today. So on the one hand, transparency is absolutely key on the project side, how the different finances are used, how the government structures work in the government to indeed be able to use the scarce public funds that are available. And we have the same issue in Germany and in all other countries, to use what we have as public funds as effectively as possible. And to use funds as effectively as possible, the one thing is absolutely transparency. It's also about, you need to know where the funds are used most effectively, and for that transparency is needed. So it's not only on this government corruption nexus, but it's also really knowing what finance has been flowing to and what impact did it have. So I think that's an absolutely key component. And the second component, just to ask, how much time would you like to give to me?
4 more minutes.
4 more minutes. I can deal with that. And the second one is obviously transparency on climate finance from what we as donors provide and mobilize. First of all, I'm really glad that we got a 68%. It is 70. So it's a distinction.
Yes.
Thank you. So I went to school in the UK, so I feel fine with 70%. But you're right. We'll work on getting. Okay, good. No, you're right. I think we're very happy that we improved on that, and indeed, I mean, we usually get criticisms for it, and it's indeed a lot of work to provide those figures. So that means a lot to us, and our colleagues who worked on the figures were very happy. But just to give you also an overall idea, in Germany overall, in 2015 we provided I think 7.4 billion from public finance, and that's I think 2.7 from budgetary sources alone, which has been a sharp increase in the past years, and that's the grant finance, and then there's additional finance coming through from our development banks. So we think that climate finance is really key. We think that adaptation finance is an absolute key component. From the budget perspective, what we provide is almost 50% for adaptation. So yeah, you can see, like, especially on the grant part, we think this is an absolute important topic. But going back to transparency, we think that we have improved transparency in the past, and that's also what the biennial assessment has found, that overall transparency has improved. But I would absolutely agree that there's more work necessary. And one issue that has been mentioned is information provision. So if you look from the past binary report to this binary report, you see that the amount of countries that actually provide information on a project level or a country level has sharply increased. In the first binary reports, there has been hardly that information. And that's really a problem, because it's very hard to then see, okay, what finance has gone to your respective countries, to which project has that gone? Is that a project which I agree with? That is, first of all, do I agree that it's climate finance, or do I agree with the content of that project at all? So any type of this type of swarm learning that we can have, because there are people on the ground and you can actually get in touch with people and say, okay, I noticed something, that's all not properly possible. if that type of information is not provided. So we see an increase, but I think we certainly can standardize that information much more to an extent that that type of control can actually take place. But it's also not only about information provision. I mean, we all know the internet contains all the information necessary, but then I don't know all the information in the world because I don't know where to find it necessarily. And that is sometimes especially true for climate finance. So I think it's also about systems, about accessing that information. And at the moment, if you look at the real market database, it's really easy to see for your country where climate finance, how much climate finance Bangladesh has received according to that type of accounting. Why is that not possible for climate finance? Why can't my distinguished colleague look at a website, click on Bangladesh and see which donors have provided for which project, which finance, and with what sort of instruments? That information in principle should be out there, but for a variety of reasons, that is not something which is provided. And I think on the one hand, this process can do something about it, but I think on the other hand also, the researchers and NGOs are key because, for example, if information listed on a project-by-project basis, there can be projects which provide that information on their website as well, and provide their views, and potentially in a more 2016 website version than provided by the Secretariat at the moment. So that's just an idea. I think I'm close to finishing my time. I think just one additional answer I want to provide because a colleague from Peru asked that how can he access funds. I can speak from my ministry. We have in the International Climate Initiative, we have an idea competition each year, closes in spring, and basically every type of organization is eligible to pitch their idea for projects that help us to implement the goals of the Paris Agreement. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Is this microphone on? No. Can you hear me now? Okay. So thank you very much, Herman. That was excellent. So we have about 4 minutes left for a few comments or questions, hopefully, from the audience. Maybe we could take a round of 3, if there are 3. And then I guess the last point I would make on your remarks would be, it seems like an opportunity to work together, that there's, you know, if we could have a system where there was information from donors and recipient governments, from implementing agencies, from NGOs, research institutions, all on each project. And maybe we could pilot in Bangladesh or Maldives or Peru or all the above. So where's our microphone? Don, you already got to go. So how about Lisa back there?
So hi, Lisa August, Transparency International. So why is transparency so expensive? That's my question. Is this a financial decision or a political decision? And I'm gonna guess that it's the latter. And I think that we've had this presentation from the Maldives, which said, again, capacity building, training, all these resources going into that, expensive consultants, whereas the real climate problems are the need for adaptation projects, urgently mitigation projects. Why are we spending all this money on transparency when a lot of our country systems that do very well with tax collection and have very advanced systems of financial management should be able to put out those numbers, make it transparent, make it in the public domain, and reduce a lot of this dialogue, which will take 2 years to agree on basic things. It seems also a waste of resources and energy when we're looking at the future. So transparency should be simple. Let's do it.
Yeah, I would say it's actually not expensive. We've spent very little on transparency so far. Kevin, up here, we have another question or point, comment.
Hi, Sylvian from Belgium. Thank you to all the panelists for the excellent presentations. I've heard during this COP a proposal to have like a unique database that would allow project identification with one unique number. So what would you think about this idea? Is it a good idea? How will this database be managed by whom? And so if you could tell us more about this idea.
We could take one more. Okay, quick response. Does anybody want to take on one of those? I mean, the question is of who would manage the database? Romain?
Maybe quickly, both questions. Maybe on the cost of transparency, I said earlier that it was costly, but it's true that when compared with the benefits, I mean, the benefits are so huge that you cannot measure them. Just think in terms of trust in the negotiations. It's impossible to quantify the benefits that trust could bring to this whole process, not only about finance, but also about mitigation. So yes, the cost is huge, but the benefits are even bigger than that and unquantifiable. On the second question, yes, definitely. I think that's the way to go. That's a system that we need. That's a system that needs to be put in place under the UNFCCC. That's already a system that exists under the DAC, the Donor Assistance Committee of the OECD. So that's feasible. Not the only thing that is lacking, I think, is political will, but I believe that the political will come at some point because it's so important and so easy to put in place, and it will, yes, bring so much benefits that it will happen. I'm sure. I'm confident it will. I want.
Well, I wish we had more time, but look, it's exactly 1300 hours, and we're going to end on time, and we'll. I would like to encourage people to talk with each other after the event, and I want to thank everyone for your coming, for participating, for being so wonderful about the time, and for some very interesting presentations. We have a lot of work to do, and yet I feel like the ice is breaking on the issue of transparency of climate finance. Something is really changing, and it's very exciting. So thanks for coming. Especially in the realm of how much is flowing. Okay. Do I have your card? Is that good enough? What's an article? So your main job is in okay, thank you.